Hey, I'm Darshan Leslie, welcome back to Nonstop Politics. I hope I find you safe and well wherever you are in the UK and around the world. Today we have to talk about yet another absolutely maddening week in American politics, because last weekend former President Trump was found not guilty on an article of impeachment. The second time Trump has been charged and acquitted by Congress. The vote in the Senate was 57 to 43 to convict. That's 10 short of the 67 needed to find the president guilty. This time around, 7 Republican senators voted to convict the president. I'll tell you who they were and why they voted that way a little bit later on in the episode. But first, a bit of background for you to set the stage for the episode, because while it may appear on the surface that the impeachment is a legal process, that couldn't be further from the truth. You see, the language of impeachment is overwhelmingly legal, right? The president is charged on an article of impeachment. The case is then made by the House managers who become the prosecution. Trump's lawyers are the defense. The 100 senators become jurors. And in the end, they have to decide whether they are in favour of acquitting or convicting the defendant. All of this language would make you believe that this process was a legal one, but the fact of the matter is that impeachment is a purely political process. Had Trump been convicted on this article, incitement of insurrection, the only punishment he'd have faced would have been being banned from running for office again, and if he was in office, he would have just been removed. So there is no legal consequence at all that can arise as a result of the decision to acquit or convict. And moreover, the result was already a foregone conclusion. We knew that there wouldn't be 17 Republican senators needed to vote to convict alongside 50 Democrats. Therefore, what we need to focus on in this episode is the politics of impeachment and how it played out for both parties. What dynamics were at play within both party conferences? I'll talk about the Republicans and the defendant in a few moments' time, but first, let's explore how this played out for the governing party, the Democrats, and Joe Biden. For President Biden, this impeachment trial was the last thing that he wanted to have happen during his first few weeks in office. He's just come off the back of a massive election victory where he pledged to bring the country together. You had Democrats picking up both Senate seats in Georgia, and Biden was building up some momentum, focusing on his priorities for the American people. The most important and most urgent, of course, being the $1.9 trillion COVID stimulus package that he's aiming to pass by the middle of March, and Biden was absolutely hoping that he'd be able to focus solely on that and other big issues as well. But of course, with the impeachment trial, a lot of that oxygen had been sucked out of the room, with minds instead having been focused on the impeachment trial. So for Biden, the best thing that could have happened was for the trial to be wrapped up as quickly as possible, which is exactly what happened. And he was asked repeatedly during the week of the trial about what his thoughts were, whether he thought Trump should have been convicted, and he just dodged the question. He just said that it's a matter for Congress to deal with, and he stayed completely above the fray. And it's quite refreshing, actually, to have a US president just above the fray, not the main story. Him and Vice President Kamala Harris were just beavering away at the $1.9 trillion stimulus plan. So, why am I mentioning all of this stuff about Biden and stimulus? What does it have to do with the actual trial itself? Well, it's all very important because I'm pretty certain that all of this was weighing heavily on the minds of Senate Democrats, because they had a lot more to lose from a longer trial than the Republicans did. And this all came to a head on the last day of the trial, where new evidence emerged about conversations that President Trump had had with the House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. Now, it turns out that in a telephone call between the two men, Kevin McCarthy had told Trump at the time of the insurrection, as it was happening, you need to stop this at once, you need to call the National Guard in right now, do something, people are in danger, this is going to end really badly. And Trump's reply was, well, Kevin, I guess these people are just more upset about the election than you are. McCarthy may or may not have used the F-bomb in response to that remark by Trump. And so McCarthy was not happy about this, and he told some of his colleagues about that conversation. One of the colleagues that he told was a congresswoman named Jamie Herrera Butler. And she told CNN exclusively about that phone call, and they had the exclusive reporting of that. And once that came to light, it became a very, very crucial piece of evidence at the 11th hour in the trial, because it gave clarity to Trump's state of mind during the insurrection, and it demonstrated that he did absolutely nothing to stop what was going on. And that would essentially qualify as a high crime and misdemeanor, because as president he wouldn't have obeyed his oath of office by defending and protecting the Constitution of the United States during the Electoral College vote count. This would have been an attempt to stay in power when he lost the election. So when that new evidence came to the fore over the weekend, Jamie Raskin, who's the lead House impeachment manager, he came to the floor of the Senate on Saturday morning and announced that he wanted to have Jamie Herrera Butler as a witness. To which Democrats initially said yes, 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 then literally hours later changed their mind and said no, no, no. Why? Because senators on both sides of the aisle were already expecting that this trial would wrap up that evening and it would all be done. The Senate actually did vote in favour of witnesses, 55 to 45. 5 Republicans voted with Democrats to have witnesses. But the problem for the Democrats is this. If you open the door to witnesses, then you are essentially opening the door to a much lengthier impeachment trial. If the House impeachment managers wanted to have one witness, for example, then Trump's defense team would also want to have one witness. If the impeachment managers wanted to have 5 witnesses, Trump's lawyers would also want to have 5 witnesses, and it would just go on and on and on and on and on. And for Senate Democrats, and what's on their minds, they are looking past the impeachment process. They're, looking ahead. They are looking ahead to COVID relief, $1.9 trillion. Biden's cabinet confirmation is still not complete. So all of these important priorities that the Democrats won the November election on, and that the 2 Georgia senators, Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, won their seats on in January, they won their elections based on getting $2,000 checks passed and into the pockets of Americans. So the Democrats understandably were saying, this can't go on forever. This isn't going to change any Republican votes. If anything, we may even lose Republican votes that we may have if this thing is elongated. So in the end, both sides reached a compromise whereby Herrera Butler's testimony would be filed into the official record of the impeachment trial, and we wouldn't need to have a massive witness process. But the politics of this maneuvering is absolutely fascinating, because questions are being asked as to whether the White House may have had some involvement in the dropping of witnesses. Because here's the thing, whenever we're talking about the Biden White House and relations with Congress, specifically the US Senate, there is always one person that you should have in mind, and that is Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. Why Senator Chris Coons of Delaware? Most of you listening to this episode right now may not have even heard of the guy. Well, he is the one that is sitting in the seat that Joe Biden held for almost 4 decades. He is very, very close to Joe Biden. They work very, very closely, so much so that Chris Coons has been dubbed in some quarters as the Biden Whisperer. Chris Coons is the man in the know for all things Joe Biden. So when I heard that Democrats had called off their demand for witnesses, and some people were speculating, oh my god, what's just happened? The first person that came into my mind was Senator Chris Coons, because he is the Biden Whisperer. And I think what happened in this situation was that the White House may have sent a very cheeky, underhand message somehow. I'm not sure if they're even allowed mobile phones in the floor of the US Senate during an impeachment trial, but somehow the message from the White House to Chris Coons would have been transmitted, which essentially said, look, you need to tell the House impeachment managers to shut this thing down. This trial is over. The jury's ready to vote. We're done. And guess what? In the hours later, the reporting comes out. Chris Coons had in fact told the impeachment managers to shut this thing down. The jury's ready to vote. It's over. Remarkable, right? So you cannot help but think here, did the White House have something to do with this situation? I don't think we'll ever know. But certainly for the Democrats, they knew that they were not going to get 17 Republicans on their side. So for them, it was all about making sure that this trial was as short as possible. Jamie Raskin and the House impeachment managers, you had Jonah Goose, Stacey Plaskett, who was absolutely fantastic and made some incredible speeches, very, very persuasive, very, very clearly made their case, but in the end, they just decided to make this trial as short as possible, and in the process presented a very, very powerful case to the American people, and even more significantly, divided the Republican Party into 2 very distinct and distant factions that frankly look somewhat irreconcilable. You'll remember that in the last impeachment trial 1 year ago, only 1 Republican senator voted to convict President Trump, and that was Utah Senator Mitt Romney. Well, this time around, he was one of 7 to vote to convict, alongside his colleagues Susan Collins of Maine, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Richard Burr of North Carolina, and Ben Sasse of Nebraska. Now that 7 number is absolutely extraordinary. It is by far the most bipartisan impeachment in the history of impeachments, and while it's actually very significant, we need to look deeper, right? Why was these 7 in particular the ones that decided to vote to convict? It's mostly for 2 reasons. Either they have just won their re-election bids in the last cycle, 2020, and will not be facing voters again until 2026, or, as is the case with Pat Toomey and Richard Burr, they will not be running for re-election in the next cycle, 2022, so will not have any political consequences voting this way, barring, a censure from their local party or something like that. Now, Mitt Romney isn't up till 2024, and the exception in this group will be Lisa Murkowski. She is up next year, but she's on the record as being a pretty heavy anti-Trumper. She's not somebody that likes Donald Trump at all, and it's also worth pointing out that she's an incredibly resilient politician. Just Google the 2010 Alaska Senate race and you'll see why she is such a resilient politician. It makes fascinating reading if you're an election nerd like I am to see what happened in her election in 2010. But back to 2021, and what's even more noteworthy, the actions of one man who we've spoken about on this podcast before, and that is Mitch McConnell. Now, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is by far and away the savviest political operator in the United States. He does everything through the lens of gaining power and retaining power. And the way he behaved during this impeachment trial exemplifies that mindset and that raison d'etre perfectly. Mitch McConnell, in the days following the insurrection, was giving out signals that he could vote to convict Donald Trump. And he was telling aides that the Trump era had been damaging for the GOP and that this was now their chance to make a break from him and possibly that his party should vote to convict him. Now, those signals were sent while he was still in charge of the Senate and when he had the chance to hold an impeachment trial in the week before he left office. However, Senator McConnell, for whatever reason, just chose not to. And I don't know why he didn't choose to exactly. There's quite a few reasons why. It could be because such a move would have required unanimous consent amongst US senators, and maybe he didn't have that amongst his members. But he didn't even push for it. He just said, we'll just push this trial after January the 20th, and we'll let the Democrats organise it and deal with it then. So what did that mean in terms of the impeachment trial for the Republican Party moving forward? Well, it meant that Republican senators would now have a bit of an exit ramp or an escape route in voting to acquit him, because the evidence and facts, as I've said, are just overwhelming against Trump. So how could Republicans vote to acquit without having to look at the facts? Well, the easy thing to just say would be, we can't vote to convict him on constitutional grounds because having an impeachment trial after the president has left office will be unconstitutional, and therefore that can't happen, and as a result, we don't need to vote to convict him, even though the US Constitution, Article 1, Section 3, clearly states that the Senate must try all impeachments. All. A-L-L. All. And bear in mind that Trump was impeached before he left office, so the Republican argument is a little bit moot in that regard. Now, what's even crazier is that if you'd watched Mitch McConnell's speech right after the trial had concluded, after the final roll call vote, the first half of it would have you believe that this was a speech after a vote to convict, because Mitch McConnell absolutely tore into President Trump and his actions after the November 3rd election. But nope, this was a vote to acquit. Mitch McConnell's argument here is this: look, President Trump has not gotten away with anything that he's done in terms of criminal exposure. It's very clear that Trump incited the mob to invade the Capitol. It's very clear that Trump lied about the results of the election, which, by the way, Mitch McConnell allowed him to get away with lying by not saying anything about the result and not recognising Biden as president-elect until after the Electoral College had met on December the 14th. So Mitch McConnell is partly responsible for that. But nonetheless, Mitch McConnell said that Trump is responsible for the big lie. Trump whipped up the mob. Trump is absolutely responsible for what happened. But I can't vote to convict because it will be unconstitutional to do so. And so that is the easy way out for Mitch McConnell, and the politics of this, again, it's absolutely key, because what you have to remember here is that Donald Trump won 74 million votes in the election. He didn't win the election, but his support went up by 12 million, and his base is still behind him to this day. 54% of Republicans say that Trump is their number one choice for the 2024 GOP primary, according to a new Morning Consult poll. Their second place candidate is former Vice President Mike Pence, but he only comes in at 12%, right? So as for McConnell, it became very clear that he could not vote to convict because he would have lost the confidence of his Republican members. The signals that Mitch McConnell received in return were very clearly showing that there would not be the votes among Senate Republicans to convict, and so in order to preserve his position as minority leader and hopefully become majority leader again in the future, he basically made a decision whereby he would not vote to convict and therefore preserve his power and keep his base happy. But at the same time, he would absolutely bash Donald Trump to ensure that he could keep moderate Republicans and big donors on his side who are literally deserting Trump and the GOP every single day. He's essentially trying to have his cake and eat it. And what we're seeing in the Republican Party as a whole is a massive split where you essentially have the anti-democratic, election overturning folks like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz. You have the crazy conspiracy theorists like Marjorie Taylor Greene on the one hand. On the other hand, you've got the traditional conservative wing of the Republican Party, folks like Congresswoman Liz Cheney from House Leadership, Congressman Adam Kinzinger from Illinois. Both of them voted to impeach Donald Trump in the House, and they are both really struggling to keep their place in the party. Both have had censures from their local GOPs, and this is a divide that you're going to see play out substantially over the next couple of years or so, heading into 22 midterms. And of course, the other key player in all of this is Donald Trump, in terms of his position. Because even though among Republicans he is still in a strong position, there is no doubt that he's been significantly weakened by this trial. A lot of Americans would have only been seeing the footage of the January 6th events for the first time since the trial, and there will be a lot of questions asked about his behaviour as to why he didn't help the vice president when he was literally escorted out of the Senate chamber. We had the footage of that during the trial. And within minutes of Pence being escorted out of the Senate chamber, Trump was sending out negative tweets about the vice president, saying that he didn't have the courage to change the electoral college votes, even though Mike Pence literally didn't have the power to change the votes of the electoral college. He's basically acting as like an Oscars presenter, opening envelopes and reading envelopes. That's all he had to do. Trump just decided to throw Mike Pence under the bus, and as a result, he does not come out of this trial looking good, but he still has his base, still has his support, which is the most important thing for him. So as we wrap up here, the question now is, what does Trump do moving forward? Or rather, will Trump be able to do anything moving forward? Because it looks like there's quite a lot of investigations into what he did at the moment. You've got several state investigations. Georgia is investigating him over the phone call that he made to the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, asking him to find 11,780 votes, which just so happens to be one more than the margin that Joe Biden won the state by. Trump is dividing the Republican Party into two, and he's already threatening to go after those who voted to impeach and convict him. The question is, how significant is that going to be, and how will Republican leadership handle that? Look, the Republican Party is in dire straits right now. They don't seem to be fostering any new ideas. They're completely divided and mostly divorced from the real world. And if they're not careful, they're going to be out of power for quite some time. My bet, though, is still somehow they may end up winning back the House of Representatives in 2022. Redistricting is going to be coming along very soon, and the GOP will be holding most of the cards on that front. But if they decide to be the party of Trump rather than the party of Lincoln, or if they decide to be the party of conspiracy theory nutcases rather than the party of constitutional conservatives, then they could be out of power for quite a while. Biden is already making big moves in his presidency. $1.9 trillion in COVID relief is on its way. Climate change plans, infrastructure plans, all of those things are in motion. Biden could potentially make some big moves in the US, and if the GOP does not catch up, then things are not going to be looking good for them heading into 2022 and 2024. Thank you for listening to Nonstop Politics. If you enjoyed, why not follow us on Instagram @NonstopPolitics, and don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.